Simu Liu slipped into my DMs.
All fruit is edible.
How did you get this movie made, I guess, is the big question.
3, 2, 1, special noise.
So hello and welcome to Josiah is Right About Film, and this is the one and only film podcast. I've done my research and there are no other film podcasts out there, so don't bother listening to anything else, at least for this episode. So I am Josiah and I am a writer, and I actually have a master's in screenwriting from USC. And the reason I bring that up is not to make myself sound cool or anything, which maybe that's a small part of it, but it's because today is a little bit different for this show. So normally I have someone on that talks about a movie, and people in the industry, people not. This is only the second episode of this show, but I did a show before Popmosis, and it was just kind of us sort of talking about films that we watch, and it's the unique experience of our perspective as just the viewer. However, the real interesting thing is when you get to look at a film with the people who made that film, and that's a really special thing that I'm super excited about, and especially when it's a really good film, and actually a film that I would say is important as well. And there's not a lot of films, and I certainly don't know a lot of filmmakers that have important films, like maybe some guy that made like a B-grade horror movie. I know that guy, so I'm proud to know someone that made something that can be considered truly art, not to diminish anybody who makes low-budget horror movies. So I am here with Justin and Steven, and I know Justin through USC, so I was getting my master's there, and Justin was one of the very few people that hired me to do anything, but it was an unpaid internship for Ed Saxon. And I think we all came up through that Ed Saxon learning tree. Am I right, guys?
Yes, we're all in the Ed Saxon extended family, which is a very large extended family.
Yes, it is. So happy to be a small part of it. So just really quickly, if you do me a favor, introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Steven and then go to Justin. So Steven, who are you?
I'm Steven J. Kung. I'm the writer-director of A Leading Man, which is the feature film we're going to talk about today. And I am a staff writer on Dear White People.
Awesome. Thank you, Steven. And Justin?
Hey, I'm Justin Bell. I am the creative producer of A Leading Man, and I am a producer of branded entertainment commercials, feature films, and television based here in Los Angeles. I'm also the father of 2 kids, 7 and 3.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm, as Justin knows, also a father of 2 kids, a little bit younger. And I haven't met Steven before. We met virtually to sort of warm up for this a few weeks ago. But Justin, when I worked for Ed, I will always say I learned from Ed a lot. But Justin was the guy I was with every day. Justin was the guy that hired me, the guy I dealt with. So I learned more from Justin than I did from Ed, especially about the nuts and bolts of making something happen. And I appreciate him in that regard, and just want to share that with my personal experience working with Justin and getting to know, like, him teaching me how to use phones that I then failed to use, but his instruction was great. So I was dropping calls. Ed was on a trip to some tropical destination, and a really important call was coming in the one day Justin was off, and I totally dropped that call. But I think the assistant on the other end solved that problem, so we were all good. But anyway,
it's amazing that you still remember you're dropping that call up until this very day. It must really haunt you.
I worked in LA at a mediation arbitration firm in Century City, and it was like a big deal. And I was the low level, so we were first in the phones. I shared this with Justin before, I think, and that created this anxiety over phones for me. And that was before working with Ed. So I still have a fear of phones because of that job before this. So I remember every horrible thing that's ever happened to me related to a phone. So
that's funny. Well, and just to bring it all back. When I worked for Ed Saxon full time, if I ever got stuck, like I didn't know how to track down somebody, or didn't know where a script was, or just didn't generally know what was going on, he'd be like, call Stephen Kung. I'd be like, who's Stephen Kung? He's like, he worked here a while ago. Just call him. He'll help out. He's super nice.
The funny thing is I was like several assistants before you. So it wasn't like call your predecessor. It's call this guy from way back.
Call the last good guy or the last sucker who will still take calls.
Yeah, either the last guy that will take the call or the last guy who was decent. Either way you want to look at it. Probably, but maybe a little bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of how we met. loosely the first
Well, which
time.
is a cool way to bring us to the sort of so what we're going to kind of do is we're going to talk a little bit about the film, but more about the processes involved. So with that, definitely go watch this film. Before that, we won't talk about it in great detail. Maybe that's another podcast where we go into great detail about the film, but it is a film worth discussing in great detail. But so I guess I'll start with Steven. Where did the inception for the idea originally come from that you then, before you wrote the script and got to those stages?
So I thought about making the movie when I got fired off of Mad Men. I was the assistant to Matt Weiner for all of season 2. And when that ended, I was in a very dark, cynical place in my life. I was wondering whether Asian Americans could get ahead in this entertainment industry. And then I thought about the Asian actors who were going through the same thing. And then I was looking at what representation Asian Americans had on television at that time. It was like Outsourced, which was this really racist NBC show about South Asians, where the South Asians basically clowned around. And there was also this Linsanity backlash happening, right? Like Jeremy Lin had basically broken through with the New York Knicks, and he was having like a great few weeks. And the other NBA players were piling on top of him. And it just made me really empathize with the plight of the Asian man, as an Asian American man. So I was feeling sorry for myself. I was feeling sorry for my brothers. And I decided to make a film about it. I wanted my first film to be about something. And this was a dialogue that needed to be had. This was back in 2012, before Fresh Off the Boat, before Crazy Rich Asians. We were at the start of a movement towards greater representation. Well, not at the start, but part of a continuum of indie Asian American films pushing for greater representation. And I'm very proud of that. And what led me to Justin is, I'll backtrack a little bit in our conversation. We were talking about the Ed Saxon of it all, and the fact that Justin Bell was a fellow alumnus from the Peter Stark program at USC, the fact that we were both mentored under the same Academy Award-winning producer. When I was looking at Facebook, Justin, and you had posted about a documentary about Christian families you were doing, and it was just like, oh, Justin should produce this. And it was basically as easy as that. And that's how he came on board. So that's basically the inception of the project and how Justin came aboard. Do you remember it differently, Justin?
I had him posted about how I was unemployed and desperate and looking for handouts.
Been begging. He's like, please send me a project, please.
Yeah, if I remember right, it's interesting. I can't quite remember that's how we connected. But that project was about essentially people who had grown up in the Christian church but had like fallen away or had been judged and rejected. It was basically trying to give voice to people on the margins of Christianity who maybe didn't want to be in the margins or were happy to be on the margins. So it was sort of a study of things on the outside and trying to give voice to the voiceless in a way. I'm a preacher's kid, so I kind of get into these, religious oriented projects occasionally.
This film and that project, not having seen that, unfortunately, sound like very ahead of their time. These are both two things of the moment: Asian representation and the struggles against that, and the sort of Justin, what evangelical Christianity looks like in America as a whole, as represent, how certainly myself, I talked to Steven before we started, I am just, as the Christian guy, because I worked at the Israel Film Festival, and people would often think I was Jewish, and they'd be disappointed to find out that I wasn't. And I think that there's that sort of post-evangelical of particularly of sort of our generation, whereas what the sort of community is. But both of these films and both of those projects rather speak to something that is of this moment right now. So, and that's the power of a great film and great storytelling, whether it's documentary or a film in this case with A Leading Man. Do you have something that can be on some level timeless? So
unfortunately it is timeless, right? We're still trying to make that push towards representation because Crazy Rich Asians happened, and that was great. And I guess Crazy Rich Asians gave permission for Shang-Chi to happen. We are having this podcast while Shang-Chi is still in theaters, and it is the #1 film at the box office. And I would say 2 years ago, it was unimaginable that Marvel would make an Asian superhero movie out of an IP that was so obscure, most Marvel people don't know about it. I certainly didn't know about it, or even an IP taken from very racist origins, I heard. So anyway,
in the comics, they hit like Fu Manchu was his dad originally.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's all been retconned, but that's how it was originally. So
that's right. Wild. There is actually a leading man connection to that movie, in that Tsai Shin, who played Grandma in A Leading Man, also plays the grandma in Shang-Chi.
Why do Chinese girls taste different from all other girls?
She's also a very fantastic karaoke person. Great person to go out with and sing some karaoke with.
She's good. Another fun tie-in with Shang-Chi is after A Leading Man came out, Simu Liu slipped into my DMs. He was like, hey, Asian American director who sees Asian actors, how are ya? I am an Asian American actor trying to get leading man roles as well. We should grab coffee sometime. Here's a link to a short I did. Because like Simu's sort of having a moment with all these like stock footage photos he did.
Yeah.
He had self-produced and self-directed a parody of him as an Asian superhero. It was him saving this family burning in a barn, and after he had rescued them, they laughed at him because they didn't believe he was a superhero. So Simu Liu is also about the empowerment of Asian Americans, particularly Asian American men, and it's a fun little tidbit to see him try to be a leading man, and be a leading superhero of all people, and to see that finally come to fruition years later is just so gratifying.
No, it's
and not to hijack where we're starting here, but I can remember in the casting of the lead role of A Leading Man that was quite an unexpected journey for us, and was the toughest part of the movie was to cast the lead, because we needed an American guy who was also fluent in Mandarin. Like totally fluent in Mandarin, needed to be, 20s, 30s, who could carry a movie, demonstrate that he could carry a movie in an era where there weren't many people carrying a movie who were Asian American. But also it hit close to home. Like the story was about what many Asian American men might have been going through in Hollywood. So that was a double-edged sword, because some actors were like, this is amazing. Like I totally resonate with it. And others were like, I'm a little afraid of this material because it might offend the people who I want to get jobs from, because I'm sort of biting the hand that feeds me. So that put us in we won't get too deep into the production, but put us in a challenge in casting a lead role for a while.
It was hard, but we finally found him. And Jack Yang really was the last piece of the puzzle to come together. We had basically cast the entire movie, but the leading man. It was really strange. But, the fact that it speaks to the truth of the situation we were living in, that there were no Asian American leading men because they knew they weren't getting parts. And then it becomes a chicken or an egg thing, where Asian Americans were just not going into acting because they weren't having any success with it. But the good news, without even talking about the movie, the good news is like after Jack Yang demonstrated his chops, he did become a leading man. He led a Singapore he was the lead in a Singapore television series, cop show, for a season, which was really cool. And up until recently, he was, I think he was a cast member of Shadowhunters on Freeform.
So I guess while we're on the casting, the other person I want to talk about is the other lead is Rachel, which is Heather Mazur. Is that how you say the last name?
Mazur.
Yeah. But I always do, like, normally when I do these, I like to, like, as a kid, I was a credits watcher, and that's sort of my first, before IMDb, I'd watch the credits and I'm like, wait, that guy did this, or that guy, special effects guy. And, that's how it, in the VHS in the early 90s in particular. But speaking of early 90s, the interesting thing about her is she is from Pittsburgh. I am from Pittsburgh. That is a little map of the city of Pittsburgh and that corner there. And I am, her first role was as Sarah Cooper in the remake of Night of the Living Dead, directed by Tom Savini. So it's really interesting to see. She's the little girl who becomes a zombie and like eats her parents in the basement. That was her. So it was, when I'm watching this movie, there's a sense of like, why do I know her from something? And then it's going way back. But how did you come across her then? It didn't see like I obviously the challenge of getting Jack Yang as opposed was much more immense, but what was it like bringing her in? Because she really, when I first started watching the movie, I wasn't expecting her character to be as significant in the way it was, and really in her story in particular to have the impact that it did, but it really did. And she really was fantastic in that way. But how did she come into it?
She was the role of Rachel was a lot easier to cast because LA has no shortage of beautiful, smart, white women. But like, and I think we saw Rachel's for 2 days. I was unfamiliar with her work. And one thing I know we were looking at with casting was we wanted the intelligent who came through and who was able to be articulate and who you believed was good at their job. Because there are a lot of beautiful people who get cast in shows, but you don't quite believe they're actually a doctor or a lawyer. But I see Heather Major and I believe she's a power player. Like I was reunited again with her on the set of Dear White People recently, and she played a state senator. Like these are the types of roles she can go for now because she exudes that power and authority. And I wanted someone who could go toe to toe with Jack Yang, and she has that presence. And I remember her in the audition, and the scene they auditioned with was the scene where she meets with her ex-boyfriend, Larry Bentley, and she just really nailed that scene. And I thought she was fantastic.
I can remember the casting directors, Sunday Bowling and Meg Morman. I mean, they're casting directors in real life, and they're casting a casting director in a movie. Yeah. And I can remember them having like very specific opinions about many of the women coming in, and also our script. Like we did like a whole pass with them, just as like a casting director pass of like, would a casting director do this? Is this how they talk? Is this how they interact with agents? And they were very helpful in that way to cast someone who felt very lived in and authentic. She's great in the movie. I mean, I rewatched it this weekend and I was like, Heather Major is so great in this movie. She carries many of the scenes, you know. It only made the movie better. It's called The Leading Man, but it's really about them as a couple in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and she's a believer in the cause too. It was important that we got people in the movie who believed in the movie, and she was talking about, I think Moises Kaufman was directing The Nightingale in San Diego, and it was all, you know, it's an Asian story, but the entire cast was in yellowface. And she was talking about that. And so she had insight on the racial discrimination of it all. And she also had insight on the way people in Hollywood tend to use each other, right? So Jack Yang's character, GQ Chi, dates Rachel because he wants to get ahead in the industry. But Rachel's character sort of has the opposite trajectory, right? She thinks if she helps this guy, she can get love. So she's also she's got her own agenda in mind. And this whole idea of people dating them, of like love and career being tied, stems from when I was at USC. There were people in my class, two hot men. Manhattan, Perry was dating Lily Sobieski, which I think was crazy. Like why is a grad school student dating this actress? And then the other aspect was this other hot guy, Nathaniel, and he was dating this vice president of television at John Wells, who was not quite at his hotness level. And I was like, oh, I think, you know. And then you would notice other relationships going on too, like in Hollywood, like Reese Witherspoon, and then Hilary Swank left Chad Lowe for her agent, and all. there just seems to be a lot of trading up with dating in Hollywood. So that was around me as well. So in addition to the Asian representation part, I sort of merged that with this other side of Hollywood I was seeing.
No, it's interesting because, like, again, not something I was expecting, but something that speaks to a lot more. And I was thinking just even things like there's the racial dynamic to the film, and that, like, the component of the boss, the showrunner character, but there's it just, which speaks to, we've all had an oppressive boss in some way, and what they target you for might be something else, but everyone has had that experience, and then it transcends what that's about, which is why film is a beautiful medium, because then someone who might not understand what it's like to be Asian and have the racist component to things, but they would know what it's like to be abused by that boss. So it's like, can see this in that world, and that's a window in for people like me who might not have experienced that, but it's like, oh, I've experienced that part of it. Not that part of it, but definitely that part of it. So what would you say in terms of how did you get this movie made, I guess, is the big question then. So we're kind of like, I guess we're sort of going a little bit sequential here. So I guess just from a writer perspective, how long did it take you then to write, before we get to there, to write to the final version of the script? How long were you working on it? You said, once you left Mad Men and sort of in that dark place, and as often unfortunately does, some of the best art comes out of those dark places. Doesn't always have to, but it often does. How long did that process take for you to get to where you had a good version that you're saying, hey Justin, let me share with you on Facebook?
It took me 5 weeks to come out with a draft that I felt good about for a first draft and a revision. And then from there, I showed it to Justin. Justin gave me notes, which I integrated. Then I showed it to our line producer, John Michael Condrath, who gave us notes primarily related to production. So, I mean, it was a very short notes process. The way this movie came together was we had a green light from the beginning, before the script was even finished. So coming out of grad school, I had worked on 2 friends' projects. No, not only one of them, but Elliot Pedridis put his first film together, and that was through money from family and friends. And then Tina Mabry's first film, Mississippi Damned, who I was also friends with, put her money together through family and friends as well. And her first film starred a young Tessa Thompson. So one thing I learned from USC is that no one is going to give you money to make your first movie. The way you do it is you ask for money from whoever you can, basically. Your rich dentist uncle, or in my case, my mom, who ended up marrying one of Taiwan's most eligible bachelors. A guy voted Taiwan's most eligible bachelor. It's a title. So she was after I got fired from Mad Men, she's like, you need to go out and direct a movie. I will help you put together the funding. I will ask my family for some. We'll make this happen. And so that's basically, it's a very backwards process. And we were very lucky to go about it because we got complete creative freedom. Usually in the process, we would be writing notes and then like revising the draft ad nauseum until the financier was happy with it, but not with us. We had to go from the beginning so we could create whatever vision we wanted. And I feel like you feel that artistic freedom in the movie. One thing about the draft that we kept changing all the way up until production was the ending. I don't know if you're ready to talk about the ending yet.
We'll save that.
I was going to say, yes,
we'll build to that.
But the ending.
The writer wants to structure it so we just get, sort of sequential. A good or a bad habit of that. But yeah, I think that's its own conversation at length. So
yeah, in watching the movie this weekend, I was like, oh, wait, that's not in the script. That's not in the script. Just some of the actor ad-libbing and some of the scenes they brought to it. Guys playing basketball and, the Jeremy Lin references. I was like, that wasn't in the script. But it was fun to revisit it and scrub. That's somewhat makes film come alive, is what actors and the creatives bring to it when you're on set.
So I guess a question for you, Justin, then. What we kind of know how you sort of came to this project, but what is it that you look for in a project like that? Like when you look for a project, what is it you're seeking in as general or specific as you can think of? I mean, maybe what I guess we could maybe frame it in what in this project drew you into it that said, let's
It's a great question. And I think different producers might give you a different set of answers for what their criteria may be. For me, at the end of the day, if I'm involved in a film, TV show, it has to be a show and a story about people. I know that sounds stupid, but you'd be surprised how many scripts are not actually about people. They're about explosions. They're about someone's dogma. They're not actually about relationships and how they change, and getting a sense from the writer, from the filmmaker, that they may have been changed a little bit too in the writing of it, that they discovered something relationally, the certain kind of openness to it. So I like movies about people, and not all movies are about people. I also like movies that take you into a world that maybe you may not have experienced before. And that could sound like that means it needs to be a fantasy movie. That's not exactly what I mean, but I hadn't really intimately been involved in the Asian American community to that point. And that was an interesting entry point for me to learn and to grow and to listen. And thirdly, and I think sometimes producers miss this, is what could I bring to it to actually help the project? There's sometimes I have to pass on shows that I think are really cool and interesting, but they're just way too stunts heavy and, car chases and stuff. And I'm like, I haven't really done stuff like that. There's probably a better producer out there. But I felt like with this project, I knew it was shooting in Los Angeles, which I had a lot of experience shooting in LA. It was SAG, but everything else, we were DGA too, I guess. But everything else was non-union. And John Condrath and I just had really great, young, talented non-union crews. We felt like we could pull together a great team to support it. So yeah, it was probably a combination of that. Like, it was a movie that it was about people, had something to say, brought me into a new experience, opened me up to things, and it felt like something I could actually drive forward. Because what producers do is they always are trying to take things to the next level. Like, if you take that producer out of the equation, there is no project, right? So there is some assessment of yourself. Like, can I be essentially the engine for the show to make it happen? Can I honestly do that for them? And I felt like I could in this situation.
So were there, being that this is an independent film, were there any, anyone that's on any level worked on anything from, me editing this as a YouTube video to producing a major film? From a Marvel film, there are limitations. Even Marvel will have a limitation of release date or something, maybe not a budgetary thing. But was there any limitations that either change things in a way that you wish they didn't, or you were able to find something in those limitations that enhanced the project?
Well, from a producing point of view, when you don't have any money, like you're making a student film or whatever, locations, camera vendors are like, oh, you have no money. We'll help you out, pat on your head a little bit. Yeah. You're like, great, cool. Like, hey, Subway, will you donate sandwiches to my show? And they're like, sure, you're just a student, right?
Yeah.
When you start to get more money, people don't treat you that way as much anymore. But what was a little bit unique about this project, it was at a time when, this is my son Dean, who just had his first acting job, by the way.
What? Congratulations!
Yeah, I'll send it to you at the end.
Go Dean.
But it was at a time when there wasn't a lot of filming going on in Los Angeles. So, one of our limitations is we didn't have a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but we had a good script that people resonated with. And we were shooting in places and spaces that you might expect would get a lot of action, but they surprisingly were like, hey, that's cool. Nobody shoots in Hollywood anymore. Come on down, shoot at the ArcLight.
Yeah.
So I kind of found a little bit like, I was a little afraid. This is a movie about Hollywood in Hollywood. Surprisingly, we got a lot of some friendly help. LA can be a very friendly place to film sometimes. So, and also just time. I think the other limitation was when you don't have, this show was a little ambitious cinematically in terms of the kind of camera toys that you want. There was a lot of cast in the film. I was always encouraging Steven to trim the cast back, So I think looking back, when you have a little bit of cinematic ambition, that's good, but probably we would have benefited from like another 3, 4, 5 days of filming. There's some scenes like, I wish we had a little more coverage there. Maybe an audience wouldn't notice, but I think for independent films, that's the key thing to keep an eye on is like, am I giving myself enough time to shoot this well in all the ways that I want? And I think just some days we just ran out of time and had to move on.
And that's interesting. I think looking at this film too, I was, I don't know how much your budget was on it, but seeing there were some shots in there that it's that there's a shot in like The Office, like over Sunset Strip or something in Hollywood. I don't know exactly where it's at, a busy LA street. And then that shot, whatever it was, just great production value, and it just makes it just adds to it. And there's a couple of shots in the movie that I felt like that like add that you would expect to see in a more expensive film. That I was to you guys' credit for finding ways to make that happen without like an astronomical kind of budget. I did think that. So from a low level filmmaker over here, I didn't notice those things, and I guess that's to your credit, or at least as much of them. Maybe I'll scrutinize and see if I can pick where you guys could have done it better. Once you wrapped on production, what did that look like in terms of then putting your film together?
Yeah, once we wrapped production, we had several test screenings, focus group screenings. And, the first assembly always comes in long. And then we invited friends and family to take a look at give notes. Ed Saxon came to one of our focus group screenings, and we just kept trimming it down till it was 96 minutes. And after that, we, post-production, we scored it, we mixed it, we liked our sound editor, and then it was off to the festivals. And we could do a whole podcast on episodes on festivals themselves, because that is a thing, right? Because there are basically 3 acquisitions festivals in the world. And if you don't get into those 3 acquisitions festivals, which primarily accept films with white leads, then what do you do, right? So we played the Asian American Film Festival circuit fairly aggressively. We opened in competition at the 33rd Annual Hawaii International Film Festival in Honolulu, which felt like a great place to open because it's Hawaii, so there are a lot of Asians there. It's a very big festival in the Asian American community. And plus, who doesn't want to have a premiere in Hawaii? And so me, Justin, and our line producer, John, and our executive producer, Pat, who's also my mom, we flew there and just had a great time. And I think Jack was able to come too, our leading man. So it was just a lot of fun.
Well, isn't that why the NFL, I don't think they do it anymore. They used to have the Pro Bowl in Hawaii for that reason. It's like, we want to get people to come to this. So, they're like, well, I don't want to play for football, but come to Hawaii. So I think they changed that.
Yeah. And so like we were beloved on the Asian Film Festival circuit. We opened and closed a lot of festivals, won a couple awards at some. And we also, we went to 14 festivals in total. We played internationally in Taipei. We played in Vancouver. And after that, we found a little distributor called Mance Media at Dances with Films, I think is where he found us. And he why don't you take it from here, Justin?
Well, what I was going to mention was festivals can be funny because once we got into Hawaii, it started to snowball a little bit. We started to get a little bit momentum. And in my mind, we're the same film that we were 4 months ago trying to get in places. And now we're in Hawaii. The very next week, we went to Austin Film Fest. And pretty much after that, we just started getting invited to places for the next 6 months to a year. And that was a fun run of meeting people and showing the movie around, showing it in front of audiences. And I believe Dances with Films was our last planned film festival before we all just kind of got busy, not really knowing the plan. And we were just like at the after party, and Mance Media came up to us and was basically, it wasn't quite like the Miramax moment of making an offer in the room, but it was close to the making the offer in the room sort of thing. And so that's when it happened. It's kind of like at the moment we thought maybe we were going to maybe have to do this on our own or something. And the very last festival, we got an offer. So you never know when your offer is going to come.
And we had a minimum guarantee, which was very rare. It's still rare. And we also had no other offers. So it was like, okay, why not? We'll take a chance with this guy. And he was able to get us a really nice, we premiered at the Vista Theater in Silver Lake, which was really great. We ran at, it was a Lemley Theater in Beverly Hills for a week, and that was it. That was our theater.
I think New York too. We didn't go, but I think we were in New York for a week.
We were supposed to be in New York, but I don't think he ever put us up in New York. But he promised New York.
So if anybody out there that saw this movie in New York, let us know.
Yeah. The deal with Mance Media, though, is that there are a lot of distributors out there who will be great to you up front, and then once you're in their clutches, they'll just take all your money. So, and that is what, unfortunately, Mance Media ended up doing. And so we are, when we find a new distributor, we'll just like jump ship and go with them.
So every story has a sad ending. That's what I'm learning from this film.
Most distribution stories have sad endings, period. But, hopefully we'll have a happy ending because we're looking.
Yeah, well, I shouldn't.
Pastures.
It's still, that part is still in progress and can hopefully continue. And
just to kind of bring it back to Asian American cinema, I can remember distinctly. It's not like we just went to festivals and waited for people to make us offers. Like we called up sales reps and distributors and sent them screeners and all kinds of stuff offline. And a lot of the message we just got back was there's no market for a movie like this. There's just there isn't a market. And I just don't know if people would react exactly that way in 2021. But in 2012, 2013, they were like, this is a great little movie. There's not really such a thing as an Asian American film market,
Which is just crazy to think about it, because how many Asian American kids, sorry, I'll let you go in a second, Stephen, that I know that would watch their films coming out of China and Japan and things that are, maybe those lean more towards martial arts films, but there's an audience for that. You think there would be aware that there is there's some level of an audience, and obviously a few films since then, including one that is number one in theaters, has proved that there is an audience. And I mean, it is a Marvel movie, so that's an audience that everybody sees it, but that this audience exists. But again, we talked about that in different ways with even finding your lead. You have to almost prove it before you can prove it with what you're trying to do, which you just kind of that catch-22 where you get stuck. But go ahead, Stephen. I'm sorry.
I lost my train of thought. We were talking. Back on the distribution game. I don't know if you know this, Justin, but do you know Leisha Jacob at Recon? So Recon.
Yes.
Recon is the production company behind the movie, and so I'm actually working with her as the sales agent to find another domestic distributor for A Leading Man. So hopefully we will have more distribution news, happy distribution news in the near future.
Yeah, hopefully we can share that.
So we have an update for you. Breaking news just a few days ago, Stephen and Justin emailed me that Joy Sauce is now the home of A Leading Man. So Joy Sauce is basically a platform for Asian American content. So it's everything we've been talking about in this podcast and that you hear in the rest of this podcast. But I wanted to break in with this right now so that you know where you can find this movie in, as you see, the countdown, 23 days when I record this. Slightly less. It'll probably take me a few more days to finish this. But be sure to check out Joy Sauce. You can contribute there. I believe it's donation based, and then it's free otherwise, though. Right now you can't watch it, but right now you can watch a special feature, and there is Steven. So thank you guys, and be sure to go visit Joy Sauce right now so you know when it is available to watch via Joy Sauce. So congratulations to these guys for finding a new distributor, and thank you to Joy Sauce for being that distributor.
The time is now. Again, hey, look at and still number one we had to delay this podcast a little bit because my kids got sick last week, and Shang-Chi is still number one. It was when I first reached out to these guys, and it still is. It's just that there is a market for this film, and it's a good film. That's the thing. It's like, take away what it's about and the aspect of it being Asian, just a movie about, like Justin said, about people going through things. And it's really a relationship film. And even myself, vaguely knowing what it was about, just through Justin and things, was surprised by that and how much that is the center of the movie. Because I think if you look at, like, for example, Marvel movies, and why they're more successful than certain other movies, particularly if you look at the last two, you have Black Widow and Shang-Chi, they're both centered on family and family relationships and how that affects, in this case, a superhero. And I think that's the smart thing that they're doing, and that's the through line for these movies, because you need to ground it somewhere. And they're movies about people, whereas you compare it to, like, Justice League, which is not really about people whatsoever, and then the audience isn't there for it. So that's the fundamental thing that this movie has. It's just about people. They may not look like you, but they're still people like you. And hopefully people that haven't seen it, at least the very, very few people that listen to this, and hopefully more people listen to this, will find this film. So I guess we can start. Go ahead.
I was going to interject and say, you're right, Justin. You and Justin are right that there are not a lot of movies about people, because television movies right now are moving towards spectacle and superheroes, and we're seeing a lot less of those characters.
I can't imagine why. Why would you move to superheroes?
But there's a way to do character-driven superhero movies, right? Like,
yeah,
Shang-Chi, you said, is a good example of that.
Yeah.
But speaking of Justice League and tying that into a leading man, Jack Yang makes a wonderful appearance.
He does.
In A Leading Man. He is the guy who gives Lois Lane a hard time in the Joss Whedon cut, but he got excluded from the Snyder cut. So even though people do like the Snyder cut, I hate the Snyder cut because they cut my leading man out of it.
So we don't need any more hate for the Snyder cut. Zack Snyder movies, that's a whole thing. On my previous podcast, Popmosis, our most popular episode was we talked about his Dawn of the Dead remake, and very much a polarizing film because people all over the map. If you dislike it, you are their arch nemesis, and so if you cannot have a nuanced opinion about that movie, or you will be hated. So let's actually talk. We've sort of hopefully built up to the process of getting there a little bit for people. Let's talk about the film itself, and I think the biggest conversation will definitely be about the ending, because that's where this film is very powerful beyond just being, quote, an Asian film, which it is definitely not. I guess we'll start with the question: how, as a writer-director, do you balance the tone of the film in terms of it has light comedy moments, but it is overall serious? How do you achieve that? That's a pretty big question. But
you achieve it in the directing, right? There's always been tonal questions in the screenplay version of the film, and it's because screenplays by themselves are imperfect, right? They are merely blueprints. They are documents. They are not the finished product. And so you can only outline what a scene would feel like in a screenplay, but it isn't until you actually cast it and have the actors run through the scene on the set where you get a sense of the tone. And then you have to have a director who knows the tone they want, and then you tweak their performance, right? So I always knew I wanted it to be a drama with funny moments in it. And some of the funny moments would be darkly funny moments because they're so racist, you have to laugh at them. Like the opening scene is the perfect example of that. You have this really talented, handsome Asian actor debasing himself to get a role. And the only reaction I can have when I see that scene is to laugh at it, because it's how we cope with it's how a lot of people of color cope with social injustice, or anyone copes with social injustice, is through laughter, which is very powerful and therapeutic. Wait, I think I lost. I lost the thread of your question. What was I getting at?
No, you're right on there because balancing that tone of
the tone,
serious
right?
versus with the comedic moments. And speaking of that open, yeah, I thought that worked really well because you establish that audition hallway and it seems very serious. And here comes the guy that they're all like, he's the man. That's the man right there walking down the hallway. And then he goes in and totally debases himself, and then even does it even to a more extreme to try, and that's where then it becomes relatable, because we've been in situations where maybe you're in a job and you're like, hey, I don't get coffee, and then something happens and you're like, okay, I'll get that coffee now, where you're like put in your place a little bit, and you're like, okay, you're about to be out the door, go get my coffee, kind of thing. So that kind of happened to me once, where coffee then spilled all over my legs. I was carrying those big like Starbucks luggy mug things through downtown LA on a very tiny project, but that I could relate to that in that way. And again, that's where then you can hopefully start to understand the deeper pain that must be like, because most of us at least have been in a situation where we've been forced to sort of debase ourselves to maintain something or to get something that we think is the thing we need, particularly for a job, because everybody needs to pay the bills. So
that's so true. And then circling back to the tone of it, another important part of getting the tone right is the casting, right? You want to cast people with dramatic chops, but you also want to cast people with comedic chops. And I think we made sure that Kenzo, in terms of GQG's friends, he has this group of actor friends in the movie. Kenzo Lee is a very strong comedic actor. We were happy to have him. He played Bobby. And then I think one of the great breakthroughs from our movie is Raymond Lee, who plays Kelvin Kim. He is blowing up all over the place. He was a lead in this HBO series, I think it was called Here and Now or whatever. And then he's in the new Top Gun movie.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Which was delayed several times.
I went to Comic-Con, like the last Comic-Con that was supposed to come out. I remember, and that was 2019. I've had a kid born since then, so it's been, I noticed that in his credits. I'm like, whoa, he's in Top Gun Maverick.
And
he's opposite Annie Murphy and Kevin Can F Himself on AMC, which is just had its first season as well. I remember I worked with Raymond on something else like 3 years ago on a commercial, and he told me like, hey, I just got on this HBO show. And I was like, oh, so this will be the last time we work together. And he was like, don't say that, but it's probably true.
He's blowing up. He's really sharp and really funny. He's got that weird Jason Schwartzman-esque voice where everything he says, even if it's serious, is really funny.
Yeah.
And so I think he contributed greatly to the
and it's a great character as well there, that he is the film's villain in a sense. I mean, you could argue that also GQ is the villain in a lot of ways, but he is, because Calvin, right? Calvin. Raymond is the actor, Calvin is the character. But at the same time, you totally get his motivations as well and what he's trying to do. And he's trying to achieve the same thing. And maybe you don't like the way he does it, but he's just doing what he can to make it, to achieve that dream. So there's some level of sympathy, even though he's the quote bad guy. And then he sort of tries not to be. It's like, how can I do this thing and still be your friend?
Edible fruit ain't gonna work. Yeah. All fruit is edible.
I came to apologize. Can I set this down?
The hell is this?
Edible fruit. It's good for you.
All fruit is edible.
God, that's a good line. I love it when he slams the door, when Jack slams the door in Raymond's face. It's funny talking about the villainy of it because GQ, and Kelvin Kim both want the same thing, right? To become successful in the industry, and they're friends, but they're also competitors. And even though GQ does like morally dubious things, I feel like Kelvin Kim is GQ but up to the extreme a little bit, in terms that he like openly backstabs, GQ in the back. And, he basically sabotages GQ to steal the part from under him. And it's just crazy that he does that, but he imbues it with such humanity and humor and awkwardness that it's still fun to watch.
And I like, though, too, I want to say, first of all, obviously, go watch the movie if you haven't yet, because we're talking about the movie now. Watch like up to the first like 30, 40 minutes of this and then stop and then go watch the movie. But anyway, there was the moment when he does backstab him and he puts the camera phone out and secretly, and he's like, I got you, buddy. That was great too, because the expectations for me is that we're going to play on another Hollywood stereotype of the reveal of the horribleness of the David O. Russell thing. Came out and was like the first big one. And then later on, the Batman, it's got Christian Bale's, one came out, and all these different horrible
Dennis Quaid has one out now too.
Who's that?
There's one with Dennis Quaid out right now.
Yeah, so you have all these horrible tirades, basically, and it's almost like a trope that you like played on in a way that I didn't expect. I was like, oh, I thought I knew where you were going with it, but it really elevated the film by the way you did it in terms of the character. It becomes like this little Shakespearean moment, the way he betrays him, but it also played on something we've seen in real life. So I thought that was a smart move creatively that I appreciated, and a little bit of a curveball in a good way that helped the story, but also is something that is a very Hollywood thing to have a tirade, I guess. So
thanks. I appreciate that, Josiah. And another very Hollywood thing is the idea, and it's not just Hollywood, when a lot of people of color are competing for a position, there's this crabs in a barrel mentality. And for those unfamiliar with what crabs in a barrel means, it means you have all these crabs, and when one crab tries to climb out of the barrel, the other crabs reach up and bring him down. They don't want, it's the attitude, if I can't succeed, no one else can succeed. And so, or the idea that only one can succeed, right? So even though there might be enough jobs in Hollywood for all of them, the fact that there are a scarcity of jobs and the fact that they sense a scarcity of jobs, it makes them friends, but also frenemies and competitive with one another. And that's what drives Kelvin Kim, this idea that there can be only one and it's going to be him. But, I think going further along in the story, I think he gets his comeuppance when he has to actually be that terrible character on Poo Poo Platter and has to deal with that awful showrunner. He learns his lesson.
Mm-hmm. Another moment I liked that was sort of playing on these things that you experience a lot in Hollywood is the screening. We go to the screening, and we've all been there.
Hey, everybody. Wasn't that great?
You watch something, and then it's like, that wasn't very good. And now here's the director and the crew, the cast, to talk about this thing. And that happens. And that great moment where there's this very tepid applause then they come out and they're that like enthusiasm that, in their minds, like we're the conquering heroes, when in reality it's like, yeah, not so much. And I thought that was a great moment in the way it played in the story, and kind of then it was almost like also like a callback to the thing that can, quote, go viral, and the exposing that because it's almost like, in a way, when watching it the first time, when it didn't work out, I was like, oh, it's such an injustice. It's a literal injustice, not just to GQ, but it's an injustice that a horrible racist pig still gets to be a horrible racist pig, and no one will stand up to him. And it's, again, and you totally feel sympathy for all those characters that are just like, if you want this job, you got to do this. This sucks. We all know it sucks, but this is the boat we're all in. And so it was a nice way to bring that full circle in a way, and he gets his comeuppance, because it didn't seem like that character was, and it's nice to have a little bit of a resolution for that. For me as just an audience member that was like, oh, that guy's the worst. I just want that guy to get what he deserves, and all too often they don't. So.
Thanks. We had a lot of fun with the Q&A scene, just because so much is happening, and Mitch Leibowitz does get what's coming to him. And there have been so many times in Hollywood where the director or creator starts talking about his work, and I just want to yell at them and be like, hey, this is not good, what you just did, and someone needs to hold you accountable. And so there was a little bit of fantasy in having someone talk back to him that way.
Yeah, especially because in those Q&As, it's everyone, the audience even they're usually just so phony. They're going to be like, oh, so wonderful, it's great. And then it's just the horrible film, but they're going to suck up to that person in that moment. That's so often what you see in those situations. So
yeah, no, it's true. We know those Q&As. We were lucky with the Q&As at Hawaii and Austin. We had very friendly Q&As. In fact, all of the Q&As for this film at all of the festivals were fantastic, and it's because the film is about something. And I think people can feel it, and everyone, especially if you're Asian, they have an opinion about it. So all of our Q&As have been very spirited, but Lord knows Justin and I have been on the other side of those Q&As where we went to go see a film and the film wasn't good, and there's just the Q&A is just awkward. One thing that made me know Jack Yang was our GQ was, so during the casting process for GQ, Jack Yang and I went out to lunch and we talked about that scene. We talked about the television festival screening scene, and Jack talked about how he was at a SAG panel Q&A, similar in format to what happens in the film, and they were casting directors talking about diversity and the need for diversity, and Jack Yang saw them as being phony and how it was just lip service and how their actual record contradicted what they were saying on stage. And Jack Yang stood up like GQ stands up in our film and asked the hard question of that casting director that held them accountable. And when he told me he did that in real life, that's when I was like, you embody our character. This is the spirit we want. And this is the fulcrum of the film. Like, in this great moment, GQ redeems himself and he does the right thing. But unfortunately, as evinced by the rest of the film, it's the beginning of the end for him.
No, and yeah, that's cool to hear that, because there was definitely a level of real power behind that in that moment for him from the performance perspective. And also going back to, that was another scene that I felt added to the sort of quote production value of the film, because that I've been to a lot of those events. I'll go to any free movie you can get me in. Before kids, we'd go constantly. Obviously that happens less so, but that's what it's like. It's like, if you've never been to an industry Q&A type thing, that's totally what it is. that's what those events are just like. So that for me was good. And I always say I'm like on the far periphery of Hollywood, but I have just enough experience and insight to say, okay, that looks legit or that doesn't. And that was one of those moments that I was like, okay, that's very real, very real. Obviously not the confrontational part, because most of those people want to just like, I want to kiss up to you, so then maybe I can talk to you, in the hallway in 2 minutes kind of thing, and, give you my number. But that's often the way those things go.
Yeah, there are a few scenes in this movie. I like to think how grounded in realism this movie is, because it's telling an honest story. But there are several beats that are fantasy fulfillment. One is the film festival scene where the showrunner gets told off because Hollywood is so sycophantic that'll never happen. And then the other part where that stands out is the end scene where GQ talks back to his grandma, because I've never, ever in my 44 years on this green earth have seen an Asian American kid talk back to their grandparent. That's just would never, ever happen.
Yeah, and I can say that's another element that people who... my wife is Vietnamese, so I can relate to the family dynamic aspect a lot too, and ways that I wouldn't have were I not married to her. But obviously you can relate to the family dynamic just if you have a family. There's a lot there, but there was definitely things that I got much more so because of having my wife's family and understanding the way that dynamic works, especially from their point of view and mine as well. Coming in, I'm the white American kid. There's a learning curve, and it's definitely still even ongoing in a mostly positive way. But that stuff is also very, very real. I mean, that moment aside, is I can't speak to. I definitely haven't seen anything like that talking back, but because the emphasis on respect for your elders is definitely much, 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 much more than American culture. Although we do say, oh, you should respect your elders, it's not like it is in the Asian community at large. So, but
we would never call our parents by their first names. That would just be weird for us. But yeah, Justin can also relate, because Justin is also part of an Asian family.
Yes, my wife's Korean American, and I learned from a leading man to always pay for dinner. That's like number one lesson out of this movie.
Really quickly, I forgot the greatest cameo in cinema history at dinner. You will see Justin at the first scene where Rachel and GQ have their date that's not a date. That is Justin is in the background there, and I'm watching it. And I'm like with my wife, I'm like, "Hey, there's Justin." And Judy was like, "Where?" Because she was like doing some other work as I was watching it over the weekend. So,
and in every movie since, I've learned to not make cameos, because when you as a producer make a cameo, you can't produce and put out problems that are going on offset. So I enjoyed my time, but I will never do it again.
So that's a good question. Were you anxious in that moment because you're like, I should be doing other things when you guys are shooting? Did that?
No, because my friend taught me a trick that if you're doing background work, I mean, you don't say anything, but you mimic the words carrots and peas and carrots, and carrots and peas and carrots and peas and carrots, and it just looks like you're saying, gobbledygook and like complete sentences. That's all I'm doing back there, is saying carrots and peas and carrots for about 5 minutes.
There you go. That's the real insight that I wanted this podcast to get us, and those are the fun things about.
Yeah. Well, my other cameo is when Pat, GQ's mom, finds out GQ gets engaged. I'm actually behind the massage chair, and I'm pushing the massage chair on Pat as if it was motorized, but it's actually me doing it manually behind her.
Did you get a credit as like special effects or something? Like
I should have. Yeah, what role is that?
Actual special
Stunt
effects.
Coordinator.
Puppeteer, maybe a puppeteer credit.
Puppeteer, yeah, chair puppeteer.
I forgot about that cameo. It's such a good cameo. Yeah, it was cheaper than buying a real massage chair. Well, no, we did buy a massage chair, but it couldn't simulate the big action of a massage chair for it to read on camera. It wasn't reading on camera, so we had to just poor man's process it.
Mm-hmm. So let us talk about then. We've reached sort of we've obviously left a few things out in the film, but we've talked about the ending of this film, and we talked about that. We're going to talk about the ending of this film. So let's talk about the ending of this film. It was very powerful in and of itself, aside from the dynamic of the Asian leading man and the issues that he deals with in that. And just, I was really hit hard by it. And then I've had a friend, go ahead. I want you guys to talk about it a little bit. So I'm like actually emotional. So go ahead. I'm going to drink some water.
Sure. So I wrote this at a very cynical time in my life, because I had just gotten fired off of Mad Men, and I was like, can Asian Americans succeed in this industry? And I had Asian American actor friends who were leaving the industry, and of my class of 25 people in the Stark program, there are only 7 of us remain who still work in the industry. And so more often than not, people who come to Hollywood leave Hollywood. And that's just a fact of life. That's the most realistic ending. And so I was trying to think of the ending, and I was like, does GQ win? Does he get that leading man role? Does it actually happen? And conjuring all of my creative powers as a writer and director, I didn't know what that looked like. I couldn't think of it. I could not imagine a movie like Crazy Rich Asians. I could not imagine a movie like Shang-Chi. Like the last real big movie we had before those two was The Joy Luck Club, and nothing came after that, even though Joy Luck Club was such a commercial success. So I couldn't imagine a happy ending for Asian Americans, and I couldn't imagine, I knew I could illuminate what was going on in the status quo and draw attention to it and push for a brighter future for all of us. But in order to retain the realistic and honest tone of the film, for now, in 2012, 2013, GQ was not going to get that starring role. And so what I wanted to happen for GQ was I wanted him to redeem himself. After he was dating Rachel for the wrong reasons and almost cheated on her to sort of upgrade and get to a higher level in his career, he realized that he doesn't like the person he's become. And he would rather leave the industry than compromise himself anymore. And so that's the path he takes. He takes, and he, that is his stick to have him leave the industry. And he also has the carrot to leave from his mother, Pat, who offers him a good job in Shenzhen. And so he's like, why am I toiling away under all his faces?
The mom has a great line too. And I say, people don't pay you to act, so I'll pay you not to act. It's a good deal. I wrote that down. I was like, that was just great and funny, but also it hits. Like that's one of those lines that hits like all those, like balances the tone, and the great delivery by the actress there too. So, but
what we haven't talked about is that Pat.
We'll talk about the actress
played by Pat, who was also Steven's mom, and that was her first big acting role. She did a great job.
But she was great. She was.
I remember on the festival circuit, people would ask, like, I've seen you in other stuff and that other movie you're in. And no, it was her first film. She did a great job. I mean, I've always seen the ending. We joke about, maybe Steven isn't joking, but I'm generally joking about making A Leading Man 2, the sequel of GQ in China. And then like he makes his kind of reboot back into Hollywood. Because what I've seen in people's lives being out here 15 years now is people leave and then sometimes they come back. They went home, they saved up a little more money, or, I have a friend who was in Hollywood, got divorced out here, went back home for years, just kind of regrouped, let the dust settle, and then came back out again when he felt just a little more emotionally ready again. And so I don't really see the end of the movie as like, that's the end of GQ's story or the end of his creative story. But certainly like for this season, he's going to need to go and do a little self-work if he ever wants to come back and re-enter. Because the thing about Hollywood is there's no real rules at the end of the day. Like crazier things have happened. People have gone and made their first film and become a star or whatever. And that can be a little exciting, but it's also a little frustrating because it's not like being a doctor where you climb up kind of a specific ladder and check the boxes, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily see it as the end of GQ story. Maybe it's just the beginning. We haven't seen the rest of it yet.
I like to hear that, a little bit of a positive view, and also just the insight into what's going on with the character, because I kind of liken it to like what Steven was talking about. I saw it as sort of that idea that he's clearly the industry and his desire to achieve things cause this horrible behavior. It's almost like an alcoholic can't go into a bar because they're going to drink. They can't resist the temptation. And that's where he's at. Maybe eventually he can get to a point where then, I can go into a bar and not have a drink. I can go in a bar and get a Coke and be okay, and not need the, rum in that Coke or what have you. And so I kind of saw it on that level. It's like Steven said, the redemption is him leaving the industry because the way he allowed himself to behave from debasing himself at the beginning just to not standing up to himself or when he should have, or then different things along the way that he is redeeming that for himself. And it really hits home that in the way he treated Rachel and taking advantage of her. It's also a big aspect of that and the horribleness. But I always feel like myself, even there's times where I feel like as a writer and creator that I've never had any modicum of real success, but I feel like in times where like the industry has left me because I'm just here in Orange County, which sometimes feels a million miles away, except when I watch Arrested Development. It's like, hey, it's fine. So whenever I feel that way, because I was working and teaching and things, and I literally quit my job to be with my kids. So there's sometimes those dynamics in life that I feel like I didn't quote leave the industry. Like a few years ago, I had a very small film festival that we would mostly do short films and stuff. We did stuff a lot at the Hyde Gallery downtown LA, but just family lives and family dynamic. And my wife and I making that decision where part of the reason we're recording this when we are is because I watch my kids during the day. I'm with my kids. So these guys are awesome and stayed up past their bedtimes to do a podcast with me. And I just think about those. There's a lot of dynamics why you leave or step aside or feel like it leaves you, is that kind of how I view it. But that really hit home because I know people who've done that as well, who make big changes in life. And it sometimes it surprises you again comes out of left field, like that. Seeing what the other guys in the hallway is where it really resonates, where they're like taken aback by it in that moment, but then
I think some of the question of the movie is, what is success? Like what does that mean? Does that even look like? You look at Rachel's character, she's like 1 week of not working away from essentially on the street and losing her house, but like on the outside, you're like, wow, she's a top 100 women in Hollywood kind of thing. And I think many industries are like this, but for me, I've always felt like an outsider, right? Like that's some of my fuel is like, I'm on the margins. I'm kind of going to do this. And here I am 15 years later, having made several movies and whatever, I still feel that way. And I realized, oh, that's about me. That's not about the business and what the business thinks of me. And I think we all feel this way, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, you have to come up with a healthy view of success for yourself that isn't always defined by the external factors and the changes of the wind of the business.
Yeah. Well, Justin, the real reason you're an outsider is because you're the crazy guy in the background mumbling peas and carrots wherever you go.
Yeah, that's right.
Just in life. Just in a real restaurant, he'll just be mumbling peas and carrots.
Just people are in chairs. I just give them a little shove, just give them a little shake.
You're crazy.
Like, actually, that feels great. But
I do think on the outsiders topic, the thing about Hollywood is like the bar keeps moving higher for ourselves. Like to us, we're still like trying to break in, right? But Justin Bell has produced a movie with Shirley MacLaine in it and was personal friends with her. And so like and he has a producer credit on it. And so it's crazy that but our bar keeps moving higher and higher the more we succeed. So there's a point where we're like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And then to your point, Josiah, about I really think the bookending images of the actors in the hallway really nails it home, right? Because we see that scene of an actor leaving in the beginning of the film where GQ is with his actor friends. They're in the hallway awaiting the audition and they're talking about some guy who just left and they're like, oh, it's fine. Whatever, more jobs for us. Mm-hmm. And I think Calvin Kim says the exact same line at the end of the movie, and it's basically the same thing. Just another actor leaving Hollywood, less competition, but it's heavier and it means something because we know the actor who left, right? We know we've been on a journey with him. We know all the hardships he's had and what he's had to compromise to stay here and how he couldn't deal with it anymore. And even though it's the same moment, it feels, except for a different actor, it just feels, if it resonates.
No, it does. And I like you brought up that bookend because as a writer, I love when I see those sort of things that build and the symmetry of it, that it brings it structurally full circle, but just emotionally full circle that you can, and it's that kind of thing where when you then think back to the beginning or rewatch it, it then has so much more resonance because, the great opening scene really tells you everything about the movie before you're being told about the movie. And then everything just happens. And then, oh, okay, that's really what was going on. I thought that was really, I appreciate when I see that. But again, just the emotional impact of it just hit. It really did because anyone, and I think we always say in Hollywood, but there's a lot of different walks of life where you've had people for different reasons walk away or move or something. And when that happens, it's like, whoa, that person's been living in Texas for the last 3 years. When did that happen? That kind of thing. And then when you find out some of these things, that it really strikes home. I just got a text message recently related to all this that shocked me. And that's why that was today I got that message. And I was shocked in that way. Just so it was, I watched this again on Saturday. And then here I am like, whoa, you're out? Like, I can't believe it kind of thing. So it's like, you of all people, never, I thought you would keep going forever. And no. So.
Yeah, it happens. One of the people who I thought would stay in the industry forever left the industry like a year or two ago, and he went on to sell life insurance. So the way I found out is he went through his USC Rolodex, called everyone and told them and asked us if we wanted to buy insurance from him. And it was just really strange because I thought he was a vice president of Alcon. He was going to be in this for the long haul, Our industry is definitely youth driven. And so I already have my exit strategy for my third act. I think I'll probably.
Oh, what is that? I'm curious.
I think I'll probably do the Ed Saxon thing and go to a university and teach. I think that would be fun.
I've just taught little bits. I love teaching. Like it's if you ever leave any industry, no matter what it is, and do something, teaching can be very gratifying. There's challenges with it, but when you reach a student on any level, it's a really powerful thing. And I haven't not taught extensively, but I worked with writing. I was a writing tutor that then became like the leader of the writing tutors. And I loved sitting down one-on-one with students and helping them write better. Especially interesting, that kind of connects back to this film. It was here in Orange County, Coastline Community College, and a lot of the students are of Asian descent, particularly Vietnamese descent, and they're not native English speakers. So that's my family now, through my wife, that it was really powerful for me to help those people one-on-one. And then I quit that job when my daughter turned 1 and my wife went back to work. She got a new job. So we kind of traded places. She was off for the first year. But it's kind of interesting. I didn't really think of that connection where I was doing this thing that would seem like, the quote lesser job than my aspirations as a writer. But even if I achieve great success as a writer, nothing will touch a moment where that Asian Vietnamese, basically grandmother, understood a basic sentence structure and had that breakthrough with me. Those moments are more powerful. And that's why, getting back to this film, it resonates, because it's about human moments like that. And sometimes the bad things, sometimes the good things, but those are the things we all go through. And that's where what this film touches on. It touches on some very real things. And I wouldn't be saying that if I didn't truly feel touched by the movie. And maybe it's because of the position I'm in, being with my wife and having a deeper understanding, that I can appreciate it more. But I hope people truly, I am not just saying this, go watch this movie, not just because my friend Justin is the producer and my new friend Steven wrote and directed it, because it's a great film that you should watch. And so with that, do you guys have any sort of final thoughts on the film as a whole?
I'm so glad you watched it, and I'm so happy that it resonated with you, and it still holds resonance. And I've loved taking this trip down memory lane with you and Justin, and it just feels good to revisit this film. It's, it was my first feature, my only feature film so far. Hopefully not my last, but it feels so good to think about what we did with it, and I just have a lot of love when I think about it.
Yeah, I look back on it with pride. I mean, this is almost 7-8 years ago, something, maybe even more, 7, 8, 9.
It's closer to 10 than it wasn't, which is crazy.
Is it almost 10? Yeah.
We were in production in 2012. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of inspired to, not necessarily by my own work, but just be like, we took a risk creatively and wanted to say something. And after watching the movie this weekend, I reminded myself that I don't want to stop doing that, as I've gotten older, other kinds of opportunities come your way. You get a kid, you get a mortgage, and it's a different kind of calculation. But This is why I'm in it. I'm in it to tell stories with great artists and great filmmakers in a way that would connect with an audience and do something a little bit different, a little bit bold. And I think Leading Man did that. And I hope that we continue to keep doing that. And together, Stephen Kung and I making a movie. I wish we could sit here and announce our next film.
Didn't you kind of tease the Leading Man trilogy, which I'm expanding out to a third movie, because I think...
I would love to see that. I mean, I see the second movie with GQ Chi in Shenzhen and adapting to life in China, and the end of that movie being him wanting to come back to the States. And in the third movie, I see him trying to get back into Hollywood and maybe pivoting and making a movie about his own experience. And so you get this meta recounting of the making of a leading man from Jack's perspective, from GQ Chi's perspective. That would be my trilogy. That would be fun.
I thought your movie was some kind of like meta critique of like the flow, the business, where like GQ going to China was actually indicative of like the Chinese film business blowing up, and it actually was like he goes over there, becomes a big star, and everybody wants to be GQ Chi, right? I mean, that's sort of what's happened
That
the
could
last
work
10
too.
years.
I can see that working. But Justin and I have continued collaborating together. A couple of years ago, the whole Leading Man team reunited in 2018 to do a short film. So a Leading Man had got me into the Disney ABC directing program, and I wanted a new comedy sample. Like, A Leading Man is a great dramatic feature, but it's not the best sample for episodic comedy. And so in order for me to get that episode of Fresh Off the Boat, I needed to direct a new sample. And so me, Justin, and John did a one-day shoot in one location, got our friends together. I funded it myself, made it for $6,000. Everyone worked for free except the sound guys, because sound guys never work for free. But everyone else worked for free. And we made it work. And that 5-minute short, Healthy Hannah, got me my episode to direct on Fresh Off the Boat. So grateful to continue working with Justin and John, and hope to have many other projects with you in the future.
Awesome. When we do our next podcast, we'll make some announcements when you guys come on, and when we talk about whatever your next film probably, or I always want to tell people like as well to like invite you back if you want to come about, like talk about a film that maybe has inspired you or something that just an interesting film as well. Like, that's always a fun experience. For example, on the old show I did, we talked about The Dark Crystal with an episode with a filmmaker who's a puppeteer, and then we talked about his independent puppet feature. We talked about like the film that inspired it, and then as 2 separate episodes. So things like that, because it's kind of the stories that brought us all into this world is really what interests me as well. So I guess we'll wrap it up there. Really, I'm so appreciative of getting to watch this film again and share it. And another compliment to you guys. So I mentioned earlier when I was watching it, my wife Judy was kind of doing some work in the kitchen area, and she's kind of watching out of the corner of her eye, and she hasn't seen it before this. And she's like, oh man, I really want to watch it. But she had like work to do because she was at a wedding in San Diego on Sunday. So she had to get the work done on Saturday for Monday today. And I said, it's okay. We own it now. So we have a copy you can watch at your leisure. And she's like, okay, good. So that's a compliment as well, that my wife, who has no time in the day with between work and kids, is going to sit down and watch the movie. So that is the greatest compliment that I could pay this movie. But I want to thank you guys for joining me so much again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank anyone who watched this. I really appreciate it. This is purely about me sharing my love of film and storytelling. And that's why I do this. And it's such an honor to have cool people come talk about their movie. That's a very unique thing, that a luxury in my life. I joke with them that even if I didn't record this, I just would enjoy having the conversation. But it's extra good that I get to share with everybody. So be sure to subscribe to this on YouTube, follow on the podcast places, wherever those are. Not YouTube, that is Apple, Spotify, and so forth. And thank you guys again. And that's it. You can find me as Josiah is Right, WRITE. Do you guys have any social media that you would want people to follow to share? Public social media?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at Steven, spelled with a V, Stephen J. Kung, Kung. And then there is a Facebook page for A Leading Man movie. And the Leading Man Twitter it also exists. It's not as active, but that is at Leading Man Movie.
And I'll share all this stuff in the descriptions as well. Do you have anything, Justin?
I'm at JBellProds on Instagram.
There you go.
Best place to find me.
Awesome. Thank you again.
It was fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
for bringing
guys.
this together, Josiah.